Welcome in, everybody, to the Flagship podcast. I am Chip Brown of Horns 24/7, joined as always by our fearless leader, the managing editor of Horns 24/7, the one and only Taylor Estes. Taylor, it is Monday of Texas's off week, 2 days removed from another double-digit lead squandered in a loss to Oklahoma State. Who ran all over Texas in the fourth quarter. That was not pretty, and the offense didn't do anything to help. Going on 4 straight 3-and-outs, a 4-and-out, and an interception. And today we talked to Steve Sarkisian, who said we can, focus on everything negative, and that's not going to be productive. So we need to look at what we're doing well and figure out how to expand on those things, and then look at the areas that are not working and
Right.
make some decisions in terms of whether it's play calling, coaching, personnel, or scheme. So a lot on the Longhorns' plate this week.
Yes, there definitely is. And even though they're off, they still will be practicing. Steve Sarkisian said that the team will be practicing Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and then the coaching staff will be out recruiting Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. But there's no shortage of issues I think that Texas has on its plate to try to correct. And some of them, Chip, you have to wonder if some of it is correctable, because one of the biggest issues I think that is showing up is a lack of mental toughness later in games. And when things start going against Texas or not in their favor, we talked about it after the Oklahoma State game. It's almost like, oh no, here we go again. And that's something that's not going to be corrected in year one or after one game or anything for Steve Sarkisian. It's something that he inherited and the staff inherited, but it's going to be about, trying to lift them up, I think, at this point as much as possible to try to avoid them from getting in that spiraling when things start going out of their control. I mean, I don't envy Steve Sarkisian and the staff any bit. I would, I feel like a coach would rather have some type of physical errors that his team is doing over mental errors, because you can't live in someone's mind. You don't know what they're thinking. So there's a lot of work to be done. And the good news, I think, for Texas is there's 2 weeks to try to correct it right now before they face another top 25 ranked opponent at Baylor.
Yeah, I mean, it's there are certain things that the coaches can do, and then there are certain things the players are going to have to do. And one of the things that I look at from a schematics standpoint, and I wrote about this in the morning brew on Monday, was going to more of a 4-man front on defense. If you play a 3-man front, and you rush 3 and drop 8, you invite teams to run the ball. And that's great if you have linebackers who are sideline to sideline, safeties who clean up any mess, and you can stop the run. But Texas can't stop the run. They're not setting an edge in defensively to stop the outside runs that they've been getting gashed by. I proposed you put Alfred Collins at the strong side defensive end. You put Byron Murphy and Mora Ojomo at the 3 technique, put Keandre Coburn and Tavondre Sweat at the nose, maybe even at a 0 technique right over the center, and try and get a push on the center immediately to disrupt things. But they don't have the linebacker core or the safeties to play a 3-man front, certainly not a too high safety look, and stop the run. They've got to be more versatile in terms of how they're playing on defense, and possibly even move some guys around. I mean, look, Josh Thompson can do it all.
Right.
Maybe you
He's
look at
played
him,
every position
right?
in the secondary. He has.
Maybe you move him back to safety, put Darian Dunn at corner, because they're not getting production at the safety position. They demoted Jaron Thompson. BJ Foster has some bad film out there. That's a position, in this 2 weeks that you have to look at and decide. And, it's DeMarvion Overshawn's coming back from a concussion. He's out this week. So get a closer look at Jalen Ford and David Benda and see what these guys can do. We saw Jalen Ford with 12 tackles in the Oklahoma State game. They have to get out of their comfort zone as coaches and get some of these players out of their comfort zone, that the play that's on film, the bad play that's on film, is unacceptable.
Yeah.
You'd like that correction to be coming from other players, policing each other. But if it comes to it, you're going to have to move some guys out of the lineup and move some guys around.
Right. Yeah. And that's where this is tricky for a first year coaching staff. I mean, this is why, I know there a lot of people saw the Alabama game, national championship game, and a lot of Texas fans were so excited about what the future could hold. But the reality is, this is not this is, Steve Sarkisian and his staff's team, obviously, but it's not the guys that they recruited. And so they are trying to mix and match, and try not just trying to mix and match, different formations, different schemes, different players on the field, but they're still trying to learn, I think, what they have at their disposal. And at this point, Chip, a part of me really wonders, because it doesn't really seem like there's much repercussion from a poor play. If a guy makes a really bad play and continues to struggle in games, there hasn't really been a repercussion, because I don't know if this staff believes that there is enough depth to bench him. And so if they're not, if they are essentially don't have any, if they are struggling consistently, keep making the same mistakes, but they know that there's not somebody behind them that's going to take their job, how do you correct that? And I think that's something that we're seeing right now with Texas. I think that, it's a tricky situation. It's why we tried to temper Texas fans' expectations in year one of a coaching staff, because you are taking over a whole new team. You have to get them ready, obviously. And, there's no doubt that Texas has been ready to start games. I don't think there's any question in anybody's mind right now that Texas isn't prepared for once they kick off, in the first quarter. It's that they are not able to keep that going. And I think that a lot of it just is falling on not just, the mental fragility, we'll call it, of the team, or the here we go again, but also on a lack of, quality depth. And I think that's, something that you can't correct in year one. They got to get their recruits in, but I know fans don't want to hear it as an excuse. But if there's no players that the coaches feel are better than the guys on the field, why would you put other guys on the field in place of them? And I think this is kind of a weird situation, kind of a crossroads that Texas is at right now. And they're going to have to really figure out if they want to, get these guys to realize, hey, your job is something that you can lose. And, you will give someone else a chance out there, even if it means moving like a Josh Thompson to safety, because there's no doubt the safety position is probably the weakest on this team aside from offensive line. But yeah, I mean, I feel like they're at a crossroads right now, and they're going to have a ton of work to do in this bye week. But I don't know what you can truly expect from a change moving forward, unless the team truly, buys in and realizes, hey, we can finish games the same way that we start them.
Yeah, and it's one thing if all the coaches are on the same page, and we don't know that they are or they aren't.
Right.
But if Steve Sarkisian needs to go to Pete Kwiatkowski and say, hey, Pete, defense is doing a great job creating turnovers. They're tied for the lead in the Big 12 with 11 forced turnovers. And the defense is playing well in the red zone, but we're getting killed, by the run, especially late in games. I mean, if you go back and look at the Oklahoma and Oklahoma State game, in the fourth quarter of the Oklahoma State game, Oklahoma State ran it 21 times for 145 yards in the fourth quarter.
Mm-hmm.
That's 6.9 a carry, as OSU outscored Texas 16-0 in the fourth quarter. And against OU ran the ball 9 times for 91 yards. That's 10.1 a carry in the fourth quarter, as OU outscored Texas 25-7 in the fourth quarter. So that's where you've got to be better against the run. That typically means a 4-man front. And we saw the Texas defense get better against the run last year when they went to a 4-man front under Chris Ash. gave up less than 4 yards per carry for the season. Um, and, does Steve Sarkisian have to go to Pete Kwiatkowski and say, okay, this is what we're going to have to do? That's not ideally what Steve Sarkisian wants. He's sort of the offensive head coach. Pete Kwiatkowski is sort of the defensive head coach. But that's a conversation that needs to be had in addition to, do we have the right personnel out there? Are we rewarding bad play? And that's what I feel like Steve Sarkisian was trying to tell us today in terms of the self-scout that's going on this week, mixed in with some preparation for Baylor, and then a lot of preparation for Baylor next week. But, I mean, this is a critical week for Steve Sarkisian in year one, because they've got to reach a comfort level as a coaching staff with how they're going to play complementary football.
Mhm.
And that means, Steve Sarkisian and Pete Kwiatkowski coming together and because Pete Kwiatkowski plays a lot of too high safety, plays it in the red zone.
Mhm.
Okay. That invites teams to run the football, and they have been. And that's got to stop, because here comes Baylor, the number one rushing offense in the Big 12. No one saw this coming. I didn't.
No,
Jeff
after last
Grimes,
year, oh my gosh.
right? Last
Their
year's
offense was awful.
under Larry Fedora. Then comes Jeff Grimes from BYU, and suddenly Baylor quarterback Jerry Bohannon's throwing for 4 touchdowns against West Virginia, and a former linebacker, Abram Smith, is top 4 in rushing in the Big 12, and just ran all over BYU to get to 6-1 and number 20 in the rankings. So there is no adjustment period, no warm up for
Mhm.
Texas coming out of this bye week. It's not Kansas. It's not, it's not, it's the run defense of Texas is going to get, faced with another daunting task in Baylor, in
Yeah.
Waco at 11 a.m. for the 5th straight time.
And who would have thought that? I mean, we go back to before the season started. We were talking on the Flagship podcast about this gauntlet stretch that Texas is going to go through to start Big 12 play, but we had it pretty much ending after the Oklahoma State game. If they can get to that bye week, then they'll be good. But now, the latter half of the schedule is more of a challenge than I think anybody would have expected. I had no clue that Baylor was going to be this in year 2 under Dave Aranda, and good for them. I mean, that's some, really quality coaching, I think, and recruiting, to get some of these guys into their team. But there's no doubt that the defense is going to have to figure out something to stop the run. I mean, that Oklahoma game, Chip, you go back to that, Lincoln Riley essentially put it on film exactly how you can beat Texas. And it was running the ball and just absolutely gashing an already tired defense that's not getting help from, the offense later in games, just like what happened in Oklahoma State. I mean, I know a lot of people, I've seen a lot of people question this about if this is on the strength and conditioning coach, Torrey Beckton, to not have these guys in shape to be ready to go late in games. And a part of you sitting there thinking, like, what else can he do? I mean, like, if you have, however many guys that are on the, get a minute rest after being on the field for, however many plays. I mean, the amount of plays that Texas is, the defense is playing is way more than what the offense is putting up in the last 2 games too. So, it's almost like, what more can he do other than making sure that the offense can convert and extend drives, which that's not on the strength coach to figure that one out. So, I mean, there's just so many questions right now. And you're right. I mean, this is a crucial time for Texas, especially knowing that this all has to be corrected before they face more than likely another top 25 ranked opponent, which would be the 3rd straight, at an 11 a.m. kickoff on the road. I mean, the last time Texas played in a road game, I guess you can call the OU game a road game. It's not really, but TCU, they had some ups and downs, and then Arkansas, they had ups and downs in that game too. So I still think this is, definitely going to be much more of a challenge and a lot more to work on, I think, than a lot of people expected prior to the season going into this bye week with Baylor, next on the schedule.
A lot of times we see a position group underperforming, and we say, oh, those players, they're not any good, or we were sold a bill of goods. You look at the defensive line, and we're kind of back in the same predicament, with if you play a three-man front, your defensive lineman's job is to control two gaps, fend off double teams so that your linebackers and your back seven can make the tackles. You're not featuring your talent on the defensive line in a three-man front unless you have a monster at nose tackle who can just wreck everything. And in a four-man front, the players are getting into gaps. They can penetrate. They can disrupt the outside runs. The way you beat counter is by, blasting through the gap and disrupting everything. And same with the outside zone. These are two running plays that OU demolished Texas with in the fourth quarter, and Oklahoma State did too. So these are the questions I think that, Steve Sarkisian has to be asking. Pete Kwiatkowski has to be asking, are we putting our best players in position to make plays? To me, Byron Murphy needs to be playing more. Alfred Collins should already be the best player on this defense. And that's something that he needs to play more. He needs to be put in position to make plays, put him outside at defensive end where he can stop the run, but also, get into a pass rush mode more easily than having to fend off, two blockers or throw an offensive lineman to control a gap. It feels like Pete Kwiatkowski's doing what's comfortable for him, and it might require him getting out of his comfort zone to accommodate his talent. And so that's one area I'm really watching going forward. Obviously, the offensive line is struggling. Roll the pocket. They did that some against Oklahoma, and Texas did it a ton the year that Texas went to the national championship in 2009 with Colt McCoy playing behind an average offensive line, let's say.
Yeah, at best, average, I'd say.
Colt
He
was
made
so
it
good.
look a lot better.
Right. Colt was so good throwing on the run. They rolled the pocket all the time. Casey Thompson can throw on the run. Roll the pocket. Do things that are going to hide your offensive line, and then try and get into a rhythm because there are other really good run defenses still to be played. Iowa State, West Virginia, Baylor, of all people, K-State even. So this is a real soul search week for Steve Sarkisian and his coaching staff, because the players are not going to play with confidence in the fourth quarter. They're not going to hang on to leads if they don't feel like they're in position to make plays and are playing with confidence. And to me, it feels like they're not in position, because we've seen all these guys make plays in the past. Even, BJ Foster and, Brendan Schooler. And are they in the right position? Are they, they don't look like they can control gaps to me. And that just means that everybody's out of position and you're conducting a fire drill.
Right.
So I'm watching that this week, because I think that the coaches have to get out of their comfort zone too, to build that player confidence. And then the players have to hold each other accountable and say, what kind of effort is that? That's unacceptable.
Yeah, but here's the kind of caveat to that though, Chip, is who replaces BJ Foster or Brendan Schooler right now at safety? I mean, Brendan Schooler's a receiver that's now playing safety because that's how limited depth that Texas had, quality depth that Texas had at safety. I mean, it's kind of a lose-lose situation in a sense, and you don't want to say that, and if you're a Texas fan, I know you don't want to hear that right now, but you're right. I mean, neither one of them are playing well. BJ Foster, I feel like, has only regressed since probably his early of his sophomore year. I would say he's only regressed since then. And there's still nobody to really, come in the game and punish him for him regressing and not getting better and making, key crucial mistakes. And that same goes for the other safety. I mean, this is where this is a tough, situation. This is why these coaches get paid millions of dollars to try to figure it out. But you're right. I mean, the safety position right now is, again, easily the weakest one on the team. And I don't know how it gets better. I really don't. I don't know. I don't know that Jaron Thompson is the answer. And if players aren't playing with effort, effort's not really a coachable thing. Effort is something that should be, just automatic. It should be playing instinctually, and effort should come along with that. And Texas is not doing that right now. And I hate to say it, but I think the last 3 years of these players, their experience at Texas has only made it to where this is not surprising probably right now, and you don't expect that when there's a new coaching staff and everything there. But I think that until they can get their own guys in here, you're going to be dealing with this. But they have to adjust their scheme to the players that they have. You can't fit a square peg into a round hole, and so I think that they're going to have to do something. But I think you're probably right with Pete Kwiatkowski. He probably is playing it a little safe because it's what he knows. And, he's going to have to get out of that comfort zone a little bit, especially, if their safeties are struggling the way that they are. I mean, that's just not, and the linebacker depth. I mean, come on, like DeMarvion Overshawn is the linebackers at Texas. That's it. And he was out of that game. And I do think Jalen Ford, we talked about this after the Oklahoma State game. I feel that he came in and played pretty well, all things considered. But still, you don't want to have a pretty well guy coming in for the linebacker group either. So I feel bad. I feel a little sorry for these coaches, if I'm honest. I mean, this is a tough, challenge that they're going to have. And they took over a beaten down team and a beaten down program. And, they're going to have to work through the kinks, but definitely have to do it soon. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. Well, I think when you look at, the possibilities of Josh Thompson to safety or Jahdae Barron, these are the questions. We're not in practice. We don't know how well these guys are practicing or what exactly they're capable of if they have to make a position switch 7 games into the season. But I think the first thing you do is you change the front and let the big guys try to set the tone if they can, because they need to be more disruptive. And they had just moved from a 3-man front to a 4-man front last year, and we're getting comfortable with it. Now they're back into a 3-man front a lot of the time. I mean, Pete Kwiatkowski does play some 4-man front, but it's not second nature to him. So, these are the questions. And then offensively, you've got Casey Thompson needs to rebound. Steve Sarkisian said today he'll continue to be the starter. When he was asked why Hudson Card wouldn't get a look, Sarkisian said Casey's earned the right to work through some things. He threw for 5 touchdowns against Texas Tech. He threw for 5 touchdowns under duress against Oklahoma. Only player in the Red River Shootout history to throw for 5 touchdowns with no turnovers. I agree with that. I mean, I think Casey, if anything, I would run Casey more.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a gifted runner. Sark doesn't like to run the quarterback. Okay, get out of your comfort zone. You've got a quarterback who can make some plays running the football. Get creative. Find what the comfort level is. And I'm not talking about trying to run Casey on 3rd and 1 and 4th and 3. I'm talking about designed runs that can take some of the pressure off Bijan Robinson. Obviously, Texas really struggled to run the football with Bijan Robinson on first down late in the Oklahoma State game. The Cowboys sold out for it, and it worked.
Mm-hmm.
And so, without Jordan Whittington, I didn't see Kelvonte Dixon enough. I thought, let's see Kelvonte Dixon. He's made a couple of big 3rd down catches earlier in the year. To me, he's a guy who's ready. I mean, and Keelan Robinson, obviously, the flip pass to him for 35 yards was a great wrinkle. And then we didn't see any kind of counter off of that for Keelan
Right.
Robinson. I mean, so there's more in the tank, and the coaches have to figure that out. And then the players have to hold each other accountable, because the one thing that bothers me about, Sarkisian saying we're mentally fragile, our psyche's a little fragile, is it's kind of an out for the players. The dogs in that locker room will say, psychologically fragile. That's
Mm-hmm.
ridiculous. We're going to go who's psychologically fragile, I'll mash them.
Right.
That part of the locker room has to come out now, because it's kind of a call out, really.
Yeah. No, you're right. It is. And here's the question for that, Chip, is who are those guys that will hold the teammates accountable? You look back at last season, it was Joseph Osai for the defense, and it was Sam Ellinger on offense. And they always played with 110% effort. There was never a question if they were mentally fragile. Never. And you never questioned if they were playing, with the highest level of effort that they possibly and physically can play. But now I don't know who those guys are. And it's kind of surprising that we are 7 games into covering this team, you and I are, and I can't point to one right now. I really do not know who that guy is. Do you?
Well, I think Bijan is, and Bijan talks about how he says to his offensive line, "Hey, we got to keep going." And he said after the Oklahoma State game, "I got to be more vocal."
Yeah.
Now, Bijan's a nice guy, but he's going to
Mhm.
have to take the nice guy gloves off and shake some people, because and not just dog him and call him out, but tell him, "Hey, we're going to win this game.
Right.
Follow my lead. We're going to get it done." And then defensively, you'd like for either a defensive lineman or your best player. In this case, it's DeMarvion Overshawn, to be that guy. And Overshawn was out in the Oklahoma State game after the first quarter. So you need more. Obviously, you need more of those players, and that's got to be developed. I mean, I look at a guy like Byron Murphy, and I see a guy who could be the next Roy Miller. I see Alfred Collins and see a monster who needs his technique sharpened, better use of his hands. That's on Bo Davis. Um, do they need a defensive ends coach? Pete Kwiatkowski didn't get to put his defensive staff together. Everyone was hired before him, except for
Right.
Choate. I mean, he's Pete Kwiatkowski's got to tie the front and the back of the defense together, and he's doing it with guys he's never worked with before, other than the inside linebackers and co-coordinator Jeff Choate. So this is soul search time, and then going into next week, we'll dive more into Baylor. But that is a surprising, um, as you said, as a surprising addition to Texas's midseason gauntlet, Taylor.
Mhm.
Um, all right, you ready for some love it or leave it?
Yes, I am. Before we get to love it or leave it, we're going to take a really quick break, but stick around because football talk continues here on the Flagship podcast. So stay tuned. We will be right back. And if you're watching us on the Horns 24/7 YouTube channel, we will continue on here to love it or leave it. Chip, you ready for some love it or leave it?
Let's go.
Alrighty, my first one for you is love it or leave it. The mindset of the program not being able to finish games didn't start under Steve Sarkisian, and it's not going to get fixed until he can bring more of his own recruits in.
I think there is some credence to this, but I'm going to leave this right now, because I think Steve Sarkisian said it best today. He said, "I'm not one, to I'm not going to put something off. I'm not going to put off fixing a problem. I'm going to address it head on." And I do think there are things they can do to fix the mindset. I mean, I look at Baylor with Jeff Grimes coming in and taking a moribund offense and turning it into a machine, an offense that beat Iowa State and rolled over West Virginia and rolled over 5-1 BYU. And those guys are playing with a lot of confidence, and they're getting better. I think there are things this coaching staff can do, all the things we just illustrated before love it or leave it. So I'm going to leave this and say that they can get some things fixed. And look, there are a lot of young players. I mean, even some of their best players don't have a ton of starting experience. Casey Thompson is 7 game. Well, he didn't even start the first 2 games.
Yeah, 5 games.
Five
Yeah.
games into his career as a starter. Alfred Collins, Byron Murphy. Some of these guys are green as grass. And they need time. No one wants to hear that next year's the year because Texas has been saying that for a decade. But I'm gonna leave this for right now, Taylor. How about you?
I think I'm gonna love it. I think it's obvious that this is not a Steve Sarkisian, you know, um, problem that started under him. This has been consistent going back throughout, Tom Herman's 4 years at Texas. Is they rarely did they ever blow teams out. It was almost like they got a lead and then played safe and then let teams get back in. Sometimes they win those games, sometimes they lose them. Go back to the 2018 Oklahoma game. They at least were able to hold off, Kyler Murray, but still they scored 21 points in the fourth quarter of that game. And so I think that there's no denying that this didn't start under Steve Sarkisian. I do think, he is going to work to get it fixed, but I also am the one type of person that doesn't think this is going to get fixed in a week, because it's such a normal, kind of thought process of these players because they've been through it, whether they're young or not. I mean, Casey Thompson, he may have only been starting 5 games. However, he was on those teams and he witnessed the teams get to the, oh no, here we go again. So even though he was not on the field, he still learned or saw that behavior, and it's kind of a learned behavior in a sense. And I don't think it's going to take a week to get rid of it. I think it's going to take enough time and then get guys into the program to try to eliminate that mentality from the locker room and eliminate any sort of here we go again when things start going, not in Texas favor. So I think I'm going to have to, I think he's going to definitely work to get it fixed. But if the question is, it's not going to get fixed until he can bring in more of his recruits, yeah, I think that's the case. I think that's true. And, it's not what Texas fans want to hear. It's not a pass in any way. I think that that's 100% not the case at all. I think a lot of the blame goes on the players too. Coaches get a ton of blame when it comes to losses, but this is all also the players' mentality. It's not the mentality of this coaching staff. So it's something that I believe they're going to work to correct. I just don't think one bye week is going to fix the issue. So I'm going to have to love it.
Yeah, and I think it's a steady fix.
Yeah.
I mean, 5 games left. You want to see that improvement. It's what we've been talking about for years. The sign of a well-coached team is week to week improvement. The great programs, you see that. We haven't seen it at Texas. We thought we were seeing it a bit,
Mhm.
but it's been hard to come by. All
Yeah.
right, Taylor, love it or leave it. Number 2.
All right, number 2 for you is love it or leave it. The biggest adjustments in the off week need to be made on defense.
I think so. I mean, I'm gonna love this because I feel like there are things they can explore, and we talked about it earlier in the show. Whether it's more 4-man front, changing up some personnel at each level of the defense. Um, I think that's where it needs to start because the offense has shown. They didn't show it against Oklahoma State, but the offense has shown it can carry the load and outscore teams. And, um, they certainly should have beaten Oklahoma. But, I mean, the offensive line, Steve Sarkisian said today that competition between Tope Amade and Hayden Connor, and then mentioned competition at left tackle between Christian Jones and Andre Carrick is good. This is the closest we've heard from Steve Sarkisian that guys' jobs are in jeopardy,
Right.
and that's a good thing. I mean, you've got to have if there are younger players who, yeah, they're going to make mistakes, but you see that upside, and they're going to be the better player. We're at that point now in the season where we got to move to that younger player.
Right.
God bless Tope Amade. Great story. 6th-year guy. Got his first start in his career last week. But he's got to battle Hayden Connor every step of the way now. Tyler Johnson, where are you?
Yeah.
I mean, he 5-star recruit, talented. From what we've heard, enjoys being on the Texas football team and going down to 6th Street. And talking about being on the football team, maybe doesn't love practice and all the grind of it. let's find the love of the game in that guy and get him coached up. So, but the majority, I would say, Taylor, is, the adjustments need to happen on defense. So I will love that. How about you?
I'm kind of torn a little bit because it's probably just because, the Oklahoma State game, obviously against Oklahoma, if you score 48 points, you don't expect to lose that game. So that fell on the defense, no doubt about it, especially as the game wore on in the second half. But the offense was just not good in the second half against Oklahoma State. I mean, that was it had signs of, honestly, it kind of remind me a little bit of the Oklahoma State game in 2017, Tom Herman's first year, that went to overtime. What was the final 13-10? But it was like the defense did everything they possibly could to keep them in that game, and the offense just stopped. And I felt like it was a little reminiscent of that. But, if you're looking at the remaining, teams on the schedule, the Big 12 conference in general being the type of firepower type of offensive league that it's been known to be, I think that, people are always going to look at the defense being the reason for losses. The offense is always going to be the reason for wins. And so if that's the way that it's going to be, then yeah, I think there needs to be some adjustments on defense. I just don't know if you don't have the personnel, I don't know what else you really do. I mean, you can't, I was going to say can't make chicken salad out of what. I'm not saying that's what this is or anything like that, but still, if there's a personnel issue, I don't know how many adjustments can be made to make it different. But I guess I don't know. I'm kind of like talking my way into the middle, I think, of this one. So I'll love it and say that, just because of some of the issues the defense has shown more consistently than the offense, that's probably the side of the ball that needs to make more adjustments. Both sides need a lot of work to do, though, I think.
Yeah. All right. Love it or leave it. Number 3.
All right. Number 3 is love it or leave it. Baylor rising to number 20 at 6-1 and 3-1 in Big 12 play is the biggest surprise of the league so far.
I'm gonna love this because they beat Iowa State, and we thought Oklahoma and Iowa State were legit, the top 2 contenders with all they had returning. And we could even say Caleb Williams is a surprise, but he's not really, because we knew he was a super talented guy, and Spencer Rattler getting demoted. There were some writers in Oklahoma who put Caleb Williams as their Big 12 Offensive Player of the Year before the season. So I'm going to love this because Baylor, to me, I thought Dave Aranda blew it by hiring Larry Fedora, that it was going to, defensive-minded head coaches have to get it right on the offensive side. They have to hire the right guy or they're doomed. Ask, Cliff Kingsbury. Charlie Strong. We know, Cliff can call offense. He couldn't hire the right defensive coordinator in time. Now in the NFL, he doesn't have to hire the defensive coordinator. The Arizona Cardinals GM does that. But, in this situation, you bring in Jeff Grimes from BYU, Zach Wilson leaves, goes to the New York Jets, and Jeff Grimes chooses to come to Baylor and has just transformed that offense. So, and Dave Aranda knows what he's doing on defense, and they're getting good play out of Treston Ebner and special teams. And so, I don't think there's any doubt that Baylor at 6-1, number 20, number 1 rushing offense in the Big 12 after last year. Treston Ebner almost transferred last year. He was so frustrated. So, and Charlie Brewer did transfer. He was so frustrated. So, yeah, I'm going to love this, Taylor. How about you?
I'm kind of torn too, because there's no doubt that this is a huge surprise. I definitely did not expect that. But I also didn't expect the preseason Heisman favorite, Spencer Rattler, to be benched and replaced for the foreseeable future, it appears, to where I think the question is, where does Spencer Rattler end up next year? The question before the season was, does Spencer Rattler go to the NFL after next year? That's not the question anymore. It's, does he stay at OU or does he transfer? And I think he's probably going to be one of the first names in the transfer portal at the end of the season if this continues, and if Caleb Williams, continues to play the way he has in the last 2 games now for Oklahoma. That's a huge surprise to me. I mean, that is so huge. It's hard for me to love this because I mean, this is a Heisman favorite. Like, when does that happen? Name the last time that's ever happened. I can't think of a time where
Yeah,
that's
I
been the
mean,
case.
the closest would probably be what happened with Jalen Hurts and Tua Tagovailoa at Alabama, where Jalen Hurts played for a national championship, probably should have won it against
Mhm.
Clemson. But Deshaun Watson leads that last second drive. And then the next year, they're back in the national championship game, and Jalen Hurts gets benched for Tua, and Tua leads them to the national championship victory over Georgia. But yeah, it's rare.
It's
It's rare.
very rare. Yeah, but it also is very rare to see a team. What was Baylor's record last year? Did they win 1 game, right?
They
I think they won 1.
Let me
I
see here.
I'm trying to think. Oh no, I'm sorry. They went 2-7 last year. So with their wins against
2 and
Kansas
7,
and
yes.
K-State, yeah, 1 point win over K-State. So yeah, I don't know. I'm just going to go against you since I feel like I've gone against you on each one of these, and I'll say I'm going to leave it. It's a huge surprise, but Spencer Rattler not being the quarterback at Oklahoma, and not because of injury, and totally falling out of the Heisman race, not because of injury, but actually because of his play, I think it's the biggest surprise for me.
Yeah. I mean, and Caleb Williams was dealing against TCU. That
Mhm.
kid looks like a natural born killer on the football field. So,
And Texas needed that. I mean, the worst thing that could have happened was he'd go in that TCU game and absolutely blow it. Like, that would be Texas fans would be losing their minds even more so than they already are. So it's a good thing for Texas that Caleb Williams continued to play that well, especially against, a team that Texas did beat too. So I mean, it was a close game, but still, yeah, that I mean, no Texas fan wants to root for OU by any means, but that doesn't hurt Texas to see Caleb Williams continue to play this well.
yeah, and I'll say it again. If Spencer Rattler would have finished the Texas game, Texas would have won that game by 30. They
Yeah,
had
totally
him
agree.
rattled. They had a nice game plan. I don't want to come off today as if I'm just totally down on Pete Kwiatkowski, because he's had, they are tied for the lead in forced turnovers in the Big 12. They've played good red zone defense, including against Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State had 3 first downs, 2 inside the 10, 1 at the 11, and Texas held them to field goals in all 3 of those situations. So, there are good things happening there. But when Caleb Williams came into the game, it was uh, like, where did the defense go? What just happened? There were obviously some poor plays by individual players, poor effort plays that need to get worked out. But and they did. I mean, there was a change at safety in the starting lineup. Brendan Schooler and BJ Foster started. Jaron Thompson was demoted. And so, but circling back to what you were talking about, I mean, Caleb Williams is going to be a problem. So,
Yes. Yes, he
um,
is.
Taylor, good stuff. I mean, it's a tough week for Texas fans, because it's like, where do we go from here?
Right.
Our coach says we have a fragile psyche. For the players, that needs to be a wake up call, and for the coaches, they need to make sure they're doing absolutely everything to put those players in the right position to succeed, not just at the beginning of a game, but as the
4
game
quarters.
wears on and the adjustments need to be made. Gary Patterson said it. I love it. He said, what makes a great coach? Someone who can address a problem and fix it quickly.
Mhm.
And that's what adjustments are all about. So,
Right.
uh,
We'll see if they have that, but, Texas is off this week to work on that, but we're not gonna be off though, Chip, because we have a very special guest for our, interview this week, former Texas defensive back Michael Griffin will be joining the Flagship podcast for Thursday's show. So we've already recorded it, and I'm just going to give a little teaser and say you're going to want to listen to what Michael Griffin had to say about this team, being a member of a national championship team, that '05 championship team at Texas. He knows a thing or two about needing to be physically and mentally tough and needing to have some dogs in the locker room to call players out. And you'll hear about that and his stance on this Texas team on Thursday. So you'll want to stay tuned for that.
Yes, you will.
Trust me, you do.
Yeah,
Trust us on this one.
it's a can't miss, and we mean it. Until then, make sure you're over at horns247.com as an annual member so that you have access to all the VIP content on every team site in the preeminent 24/7 sports network, and become a subscriber to the Horns 24/7 YouTube channel so that you never miss a single episode of all the great podcasts coming out of Horns 24/7. So for Taylor Estes, I'm Chip Brown. Until next time here on the Flagship Podcast, stay safe and keep the faith.